Morning all. Specialist police divers have been searching through the night at a freezing lake in Solihull near Birmingham. Emergency responders were called just after 2:30 on Sunday afternoon. 4 children were pulled from the water after falling through the ice. Those children are now being cared for in hospital and were in a critical condition on arrival there. Now, there had been reports of as many as 6 people in the water. Let's get the very latest. Sky's Becky Johnson is at the scene. Morning, Becky. An absolutely horrible, horrible story. Do we know if there are perhaps still people in that lake yet?
That is the fear that led specialist dive teams to work long into the night here in Solihull in freezing conditions, continuing to search the lake. When the initial report went into emergency services, there was a suggestion as many as 6 people may have fallen into the lake after children were seen playing on the ice. Now, as we know, emergency services were able to pull 4 children out of the water. They were all in a critical condition. They had suffered cardiac arrest and were being resuscitated on their way to hospital yesterday evening, but still no update about the possibility that 2 more children could still be missing, and so we do await more details from emergency services later today. In the darkness, they continued to search this lake in Solihull for any signs of life. Children had been playing on ice here. When they fell in, people nearby did all they could to help.
When our firefighters arrived, a number of police officers and members of the public were in the water, trying to reach and rescue the children. Our crews entered the water, swam to the first child, and our specialist trained firefighters, including technical rescue, rescued 3 further children.
The children were in cardiac arrest. They were blue lighted to nearby hospitals, all critically ill. But reports that more people may still be missing prompted a major search. After many hours had passed, they announced they no longer expected to find anyone else alive. The temperature here has barely risen above freezing, and rescue workers say it would be impossible to survive in the icy water for this long. It is a terrifying reminder of the dangers of the Arctic conditions currently being felt right across the country. And we're being warned there could be another week of this weather to come. As the country battles to stay warm, emergency workers say this should be a warning to people to do all they can to stay safe. Well, you can take a little look down at that lake here this morning. You can possibly just make out behind me the light. That's where the emergency workers set up a base, where those specialist dive teams were going into the water. We saw them out on inflatable rafts last night, using those long poles to search meticulously through the deep freezing water of that lake. It has caused a huge amount of shock in this community, as you would imagine, and it is those fears that potentially 2 more children could still be in the water that prompted these extensive searches despite the conditions. I have never seen so many emergency workers in one place as when we turned up here yesterday evening. There were dozens of specially trained paramedics, fire officers, police, all here doing absolutely everything they could to try to find anyone who may still be in that water. The temperatures are bitter, and that is why, very sadly last night, the fire service said they had concluded that this would now be a recovery operation. They just don't think it would be possible to survive for many hours in the very, very cold water of this lake. This morning, the search teams are no longer here. We will have to see if they come back at first light. And as I say, we are expecting some update from the emergency services on the condition of those 4 children who last night were fighting for their lives in hospital.
Becky, thanks very much indeed. A horrible, horrible story, of course, and we'll give you any update that we get just as soon as it arrives. And now, clearly, the Arctic blast has caused significant disruption right across the country. Long stretches of the M25 motorway have been jammed. Drivers in the southeast are being asked by National Highways not to travel unless they absolutely have to. People have been describing to Sky News how they've been stuck in their cars through the freezing night.
been an absolute standstill for over 3 hours. So it's pretty disheartening. I mean, the UK, we're just rubbish. We are rubbish when the weather gets extreme, aren't we? We really are bad. No, so I'm meant to be getting home for Nottingham, home to Nottingham. So, maybe I'll definitely get home for Christmas. Maybe that's the plan. We've got a new plan.
Big problems at the airports as well. Both Gatwick and Stansted had to close their runways yesterday to clear the snow. They are open again now, but with reduced flights and a huge backlog of waiting passengers. Travellers are being warned to check with their carrier before leaving for the airport. Well, let's speak to someone who finds themselves at Gatwick Airport. Bethany Wotton has been stranded there and she joins us on the line. Bethany, good to talk to you. First things first, where were you supposed to be going?
To Bali.
To Bali, and instead you're trapped at Gatwick. I mean, how long have you been there for?
I've been here around 17 hours.
17 hours?
Yes. Stranded here.
What kind of communication have you had from the airline and from the airport? Have they given you any idea of when you might be heading off?
Nothing so far. We spoke to some staff when we came back through customs yesterday. They said to go back to your airline desk in the morning around 8 o'clock and they'll tell us some more information, but that's all we've heard. And we couldn't get any hotels last night as everywhere was fully booked. Everyone's in the same position. Everyone has just been sleeping on the floor.
So how many of you are there, Bethany? Who's travelling with you at the moment?
I'm with my boyfriend at the moment.
And how have you guys managed to cope? I mean, have you managed to grab any sleep yourselves?
Not really. I've had a couple of hours, but everyone's in the same situation. There's lots of people, children as well, and everyone's just trying to get some sleep. But it's really cold as well in here.
I can only imagine. I mean, have you at least been provided with some teas, coffees, food, anything like that?
No, nothing. Haven't had really any help from any staff. Can't really find anyone to speak to. Just been a bit of a nightmare.
So, Bethany, was this you heading off for the Christmas period, or is this just a quick trip you were planning?
No. I was moving to Australia, so we were going to Bali for 2 weeks for Christmas and then heading out to Australia.
Oh dear. Yeah. So what's this going to do for your plans? I mean, if you can't get away today, what does that maybe mean for the trip to Bali?
Yeah, so our trip, we will have to miss out parts of our trip that we've already booked. I've also had to cancel some things we've already tried to book already. I'm not sure if we'll get any money back from the airline, as they said they wouldn't even offer us money for a hotel for the night. Is there
any thought in your mind of just jacking it in, leaving the airport, going home and getting yourselves warm and maybe getting some sleep?
Yes, I did think that last night before I even tried to sleep. But going to try again today, and then maybe we will have to go back.
And I suppose, Bethany, you must have been looking forward to this trip for quite a long time.
Yes, and obviously we've already said bye to everyone at home, so...
Oh, dear. Well, look, I will be keeping my fingers crossed, Bethany. I mean, moving to Australia is a big old trip in and of itself, but to miss out on the Bali leg. Look, well, stay warm and keep in touch, and look, let us know if you manage to get on that plane sometime today. I hope you do.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You take care, Bethany. Well, let's bring in Sky's Becky Cottrell at Victoria Station in London. Victoria, good to see you. What is the state of play in terms of transport this morning, Becky? I mean, I know myself from driving in this morning, the roads are absolutely treacherous, and frankly, people, if they can avoid driving today, really should do. But what about the public transport aspect?
well, certainly if you're trying to get the train, you're likely to face problems today, particularly if you're here in the South East or London. I'm at London's Victoria Station. Many of the lines here suspended. The companies that operate up here, South Eastern, Southern Rail, the Gatwick Express, they've all had problems with snow on the tracks overnight. As I say, having to cancel services today. They are trying to get them back up and running, but it's likely the disruption will continue for much of the day. And it's, of course, not just the conditions on the tracks that are the problem. They're also trying to put on replacement bus services, but if the conditions on the road simply aren't good enough, then that is not going to be possible either. As you mentioned, drivers also facing a lot of problems. We are getting into Monday rush hour now, and as you said, the advice in South East, simply don't travel unless you absolutely have to. Reports of drivers stuck on the roads in the snow, and as they're trying to clear that, clearly some of the backlog may clear, but it's going to continue for much of the day. So really, particularly if you're here in the South East, I would stay home unless you absolutely have to travel.
Becky, thank you. A bit of breaking for you. The latest growth figures for October have just been published in the last few minutes. GDP growing by 0.5% in October, and that follows a fall of 0.6% the previous month, which of course was affected by the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth. We'll be getting reaction to those figures from the Chancellor later this morning. Now, he has said there is a tough road ahead. Jeremy Hunt, in a few minutes' time, will be speaking to our economics editor, Ed Conway. When we get the tape back, we'll bring it right to you. But it is not just snow and ice causing disruption this week. Rail workers, nurses, posties, well, they're all walking out. The government's emergency Cobra committee meets this morning, and ministers have made an official request to the military to drive ambulances during the strikes. Here's our political correspondent, Rob Powell.
Get used to this.
What do you want? Why do you want it?
The coming days will see strikes on the trains, at Royal Mail and in the NHS. Now the government is ramping up its plans to limit disruption, with the Cobra Emergency Response Committee meeting today. Troops will also start arriving at hospitals this week to start training to drive ambulances. A strike by the Nurses' Union is still due on Thursday after the government rejected their offer of negotiations over pay.
Save our NHS! Save our NHS!
But could this week be just the start? Junior doctors walked out in 2016 for the first time in 4 decades. Ahead of a ballot next month, their union is clear about the pay rises they want now and the chances of future strikes.
I think it's likely, unless the government is willing to negotiate with us about pay. So we're asking for a reversal of a pay cut. We've had, a pay cut for junior doctors of 26.1% since 2008. So over a quarter of our pay has been lost.
It's been calmer than usual here in recent weeks, but Christmas cheer is probably still in short supply for a Prime Minister who has problems piling up. It increasingly feels like the government is moving from trying to avert the strikes to just managing their impact. But Rishi Sunak is in a tight spot, squeezed on one side by unions demanding higher pay, and on the other by Tory MPs who are becoming increasingly vocal about the government's tax and spend policies. Politics aside, the end result is a week ahead where most people will notice the impact of strike action. Who they blame for it will shape the political fallout and the fortunes of the Prime Minister. Rob Powell, Sky News in Westminster.
Thousands of NHS workers, including, of course, nurses, are scheduled to take part in strikes across December, the first of those taking place today, when Unison members working in the NHS in Northern Ireland will be walking out. Nurses across England, Wales and Northern Ireland also striking on the 15th and the 20th of the month. Ambulance workers, what about those? Well, those will be taking industrial action on the 21st and the 28th. Postal workers were on picket lines yesterday for a second day of strikes this month. Workers are expected to continue striking across December. And what about the railways? Rail strikes taking place over 4 days this week and from Christmas Eve until early on the 27th. More also planned come January. Border Force staff, driving test examiners, security staff on Eurostar and some civil servants also walking out this month. Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, is here. And a bit of breaking news on this topic this morning. An official request has been put in for the military to help driving ambulances. What's the significance of this?
That's right. So the government are ramping up their contingency plans for these strikes. Obviously, they're urging the unions to pull back from the brink and to call the strikes off. But in the meantime, they are preparing for them to happen. And certainly for the ambulances strike, which begins on the 21st of December, a request has now gone in. It's called a Meacher request, military aid to the civilian authorities. And it's basically a formal request for army personnel to help out with driving, with some of the logistics roles. And there are, I understand, 600 military personnel who would be deployed as ambulance drivers and another 150 as support workers. But consider the fact that
close to
10,000 ambulance workers, yes, are going on strike. So they will be, in the coming days, going to hospital trusts to learn how it all works, because, of course, they're not trained as ambulance drivers. They're not trained in all the logistics around it. So it is a worrying time for anyone who might need one during that period. But they are being prepared for those roles. And they're also being prepared to stand in for the border force, who are also going to be going on strike at various different airports and ports over the next few days as well. So military personnel preparing for that. They will have their Christmas leave cancelled to do that because, of course, they can't go on strike. But we now have strikes in 10 different sectors, and there will be a second COBRA meeting on Wednesday, the first one this afternoon, to work out how exactly the government are going to respond to the challenges posed by those strikes.
Yeah, why do I get the feeling the military are going to be particularly busy this Christmas? Tamara, for now, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's stick with the story. Joining us now, Alan Loftis, National Officer at Unison. Alan, very good morning to you. First of all, can I just get your reaction to that which Tamara was just telling us, that official request has gone into the military to assist in terms of ambulance drivers? Of course, we're discussing nurses in Northern Ireland, but should we have any concerns about the military stepping into a role that frankly, is not theirs?
I mean, I think that all of our ambulance workers in Unison respect the military and respect the support that they're offering. But of course, as your correspondent called us, ambulance drivers is far from the truth. Actually, they're highly trained urgent and emergency care workers who know how to work in the NHS, and the military can't just be put in place of ambulance workers and expect that the service is going to run as normal. I mean, it's a great offer by the military, but it's not going to go anywhere near stopping the strikes and the walkouts that are due to happen on the 21st.
Yeah, it is a sticking plaster, if even that. But let's talk about Northern Ireland, Alan. And to what extent should people there expect services to be disrupted today?
Well, Unison, when it takes strike action, will work with employers to put in life and limb cover. So I know that, our health workers there have been talking to their employers about making sure that those people in serious need will get aid, but it will be disruptive for the public. And this has to be a wake-up call for the government that's refused to sit down and just have talks with us. And that's all we've really been asking for, is their 72 pence an hour pay rise that they awarded late last year has not gone enough to, deal with the problem of the rising cost of living for many NHS staff. And I think this is the sort of decision that's never taken lightly by health staff. But we've got to this point after 10 years of austerity that haven't delivered anything for NHS workers, and they're taking a stand now, and the government really needs to sit down and talk to us.
So just explain exactly, when you say life and limb cover, what does that refer to? I mean, it's a phrase that I think people will recognise, but perhaps not the specifics.
So it's places like critical care, places like accident emergency and ambulance services will have a responsibility to put on life and limb cover. So the very, very most serious people. So if you're in a cardiac arrest, you still need somebody to come along and give you life-saving aid. But, the ambulance service and hospitals are used often for urgent care as well. And I think urgent care is probably which is going to be most disrupted. So there will be talks, and I don't know about exactly how the talks went in Northern Ireland, but I'm sure that they have got some cover arrangements. But this is the willingness of staff to work through strike. And the trouble is, if the government don't start talking to us, that staff will get increasingly frustrated with this war against them as they see the rhetoric from the government. And they then may choose not to provide life and limb cover, which is the place I don't think any of us want to get to. So there's a real urgency for the government to wake up, stop looking at ways to prevent striking workers from striking, and talk to us about pay and the cost of living.
So just to be absolutely clear there, Alan, you think there may come a point in the not too distant future, if the government doesn't, sit down round the table, where you would remove life and limb cover?
No, I'm not saying that we would remove the life limb cover. What happens is, you see, we will say to our members who are able to take their legal right to strike that we would like you to provide life and limb cover. But it's up to that individual worker whether or not they do take that up. And if enough people get sick of the government rhetoric against them as they see this, attack on striking workers is really an attack on health workers, they may very well choose then not to come into work and provide that life and limb cover. And we don't want to get to that position. So it's really the government need to sit down and start talking to us urgently.
I suppose the issue is this, Alan, and look, clearly there is an awful lot of public support for public sector workers getting a fair deal in terms of their cash. I don't know what it is like outside the window just to your left there. You're at sea level down in Bournemouth, so perhaps you don't have the ice and the snow that we have here. But you know the situation that there is across much of the country today. There will be an awful lot of people having falls, trips, spills and the like, not necessarily requiring immediate urgent care, but requiring care. And that's not going to be available to many of them today in Northern Ireland.
No, and do you know what? The care is already not available to people, and that goes from healthcare to social care. This government have allowed 10 years of ruining our health and care service. So staff are taking a stand against the state of the service. I mean, they are people in their own communities. You've got to remember this, that health workers live in their communities that are served by them, and they don't take these decisions lightly. But they know the quality of the care that they're able to give at the moment because of the state of their health service is already perilous. So yes, it's about pay, but it's also about the quality of the NHS, the quality of social care. These are all things that we need to do something about, and urgently.
Alan, many thanks for joining us. That's Alan Loftis, National Officer at Unison. Plenty coming up on the show this morning. First, what to look for if you think your child might be sick with strep A and when to seek help. That's at around about past. We'll also be hearing from Richard Marquis, former head of the US government's investigation into the Lockerbie bombing after the arrest of the suspected bomb maker. Just after 8, we'll be speaking to Labour's Shadow Minister for Health and Social Care, Liz Kenny. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has held talks with the leaders of the United States, Turkey and France. With daytime temperatures barely rising above freezing, Russia has been hitting the country's power stations. More than 1 million homes in the port city of Odessa have been without electricity. Our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, is in Odessa. And Deborah, I mean, the sun is up where you are, but when the power is off and the night falls, it must be pretty grim.
It is very grim. It's more about the length of time as well that the power is going out. The country has been bombarded by Russia since October in a deliberate strategy to take out the power infrastructure. And it means that they're having to restrict the power that they do have, and then engineers are working round the clock trying to reconnect the grid. There was this strike at the early hours of Saturday using Iranian drones that the Russians have bought, it would seem, against this port city over here. And like you said, the president said that 1.5 million people were left without power. Now, come yesterday evening, the power was back on in the centre of the city, but we went to a residential block on the outskirts where we met people that are literally sitting inside their cars. There's this one young couple huddled in their dressing gowns, smiling still, despite the inconvenience, and saying that even if Russia, as is expected, continues with this policy of turning people's homes into a sort of front line on the energy war, they're going to resist. And this all comes, we mustn't forget, as there is horrendous fighting continuing in the east of the country as Russian forces, beaten back in parts of the southeast and parts of the south, are desperately trying to take the town of Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces are trying to hold the line there, but there are devastating fights going on. The casualties are horrendously high. The weather is very cold. It's incredibly grim.
Deborah, many thanks indeed. Let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. And it is now known that 5 people lost their lives after an explosion and fire at a block of flats in Jersey. It's also emerged that firefighters had been called to the flats hours before the blast. Emergency services were there to investigate claims of a gas leak. A man who killed his wife almost 40 years ago will become the first prisoner to have a public parole board hearing in the UK. Russell Cosley, I should say, was handed a life sentence for murdering Carol Packman in 1985. He was freed from prison in 2020 after serving more than 23 years for the murder, but was returned to jail in November last year. Energy prices in the UK have soared to record heights, with the cold snap set to cause a spike in demand. Reduced wind generation is also affecting supply. The day-ahead price for power to be delivered on Monday reached a record £675 a megawatt hour. Well, let's take a look at what's ahead for this freezing weather. I'm joined by Sky meteorologist Steph Galter. Steph, good to see you, and good to see you wrapped up warm as well. I mean, just how bad was it last night? I saw temperatures minus 15, well, in a part of the country that I know well.
Yeah, minus 16 we got to in Braemar in Scotland. Very, very cold. Elsewhere, it wasn't quite that bad. We generally had minus 4s to minus 7s in parts of Scotland, and then we did have 1 or 2 isolated sort of minus 4 in parts of Wales and England. But the main story, of course, last night was that snow. We've got this huge area of low pressure over us at the moment. It's quite weak and flabby, but it's got 1 or 2 little weather systems within it, sort of like dying fronts, if you will. And that one just popped up from the English Channel and gave us loads of snow in the southeast corner. So London, also further east than that. That's where we got the worst of the snow. The official recording for the amount of snow was around 9 centimetres, but some places did say they got 12 centimetres. So that's the kind of amount of snow, which for the southeast corner is a lot. Fortunately, today, it doesn't look like there's going to be a great deal more wintry weather, so the snow shouldn't be so bad today. Instead, what we're going to see as we head through the night is some freezing fog, and that will cause us different problems, of course, on the roads. It makes it very difficult to get about. And as we head through the next few days, does it get any better, Neil? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't. If anything, we've got a renewed Arctic blast as we head through Wednesday, Thursday. That will hit northern Scotland. We can expect plenty of snow there, and elsewhere, staying very, very cold.
Very, very cold indeed. Steph, many thanks. Get inside and get yourself a cup of tea. Now, some of the photos catching our eye today, and I'm sorry to say it, football may not be coming home, but this little fella is. His name is Dave the Cat, and he's been adopted by England's football team. Sweet little thing. Dave won their hearts whilst hanging out at the team's hotel in Doha. Now, though, here is a shot of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, which lifted off from Cape Canaveral early yesterday with a commercial Japanese robotic moonlander and a NASA hitchhiker micro payload called Lunar Flashlight that will be seeking out signs of water ice hidden in the permanently dark floors of craters at the moon's poles. What will it discover? We'll keep our fingers crossed. Anyway, stay where you are. The man who was in charge of the US investigation into the Lockerbie disaster will be giving us his take on the arrest of the suspected bombmaker. That's next. Welcome back. A reminder as to our top stories this hour. And 4 children remain in a critical condition after falling through the ice into a lake in Solihull. Specialist divers are searching the water for anyone else who may be missing. Heavy snow and ice has brought the M25 to a standstill through the night. Drivers have been describing being stuck in their cars for hours on end. And ministers have made an official request for the military to drive ambulances during the strikes. Now, GPs want the government to publish clearer advice about Strep A for parents, as doctors struggle to deal with an outbreak linked to the deaths of at least 15 children now. Dr. Jonathan Cohen is a consultant in paediatric infectious diseases at Evelina London Children's Hospital, and as you can see, joins us now. Doctor, great to have you on.
Morning.
We need to pour an awful lot of calming oil on some pretty troubled waters, but let's start with the most significant question. What is Strep A, and what do parents need to be keeping an eye out for?
So, Group A Streptococcus, or Strep A, is a bacteria. It's very commonly carried in children's throats. About 1 in 10 school children will actually have this bacteria in their throat. And the fact that it's that common, I think that really tells us that for the vast majority of children who have Strep A, they will have no problems whatsoever. Sometimes it can cause sore throats, often referred to as strep throat. And again, that's usually a mild illness, sometimes with a fever. More rare than that is something called scarlet fever, where children can develop quite a bright red rash on a paler skin, often with a sandpapery rough texture to it, often with changes in their tongue as well. Where I think the concern comes in is the much rarer but more severe invasive group A strep, which is when the bacteria actually gets into the bloodstream or into the lungs and can then cause very serious disease.
Eye gas is, I think...
Eye gas, invasive group A strep.
So when that happens, what is it that parents should be looking out for? Because ultimately, parents know their children better than their medical practitioner, better than their GP. We know when there is something wrong. But specifically, when should the alarm bells be ringing?
So exactly, I'd completely agree with that. And this isn't a new infection. So in a sense, the ways in which a parent would recognise their child would have a serious illness is no different from group A strep. So the things where you'd have immediate concern and want to call 999 or get to an emergency department as soon as possible would be if there was worries about the child's breathing, irregular breathing, difficulty breathing, pauses in their breathing, if their colour didn't look right in their tongue and their lips, if it was blue or grey and hands and feet looking an abnormal colour, that would raise great concern. A child who's difficult to rouse, very, very sleepy.
Lethargy, that's the one thing.
That's extreme lethargy. They're the very worrying symptoms. That suggests that they have a serious infection, and that's a time to call 999 or get to the emergency department. So
what is the treatment in those kind of across the board? I mean, antibiotics strikes me as kind of as the first port of call, isn't it?
Absolutely. So for these very, very rare cases of invasive group A strep, eye gas, antibiotics are the mainstay of treatment, and they're given intravenously. The majority of children who have a disease as a result of strep won't have eye gas, and they can be treated with oral antibiotics instead. And in fact, many children with the most mildest forms of streptococcal infection get better by themselves, even without antibiotics.
Are we edging closer to working out why we have seen so many deaths linked to strep A? Look, as I understand it, we do see them every year, a handful of them. And I'm not sure if we have a statistically significant enough data set yet to make this point, but it feels as if there are more this year than there have been in previous years.
So I'd agree, and very much it's an evolving situation, and it's very difficult at the moment to draw firm conclusions about what exactly is causing the changes that are happening. What we do know, though, looking back over many decades, is that there are years, every 3 or 4 years, of greater numbers of group A strep infection in all its forms, scarlet fever and eye gas. We also know that it changes seasonally during the course of the year. So you'll get a rise often as the winter moves into spring, and then it settles down again. We've seen this year that rise seems to be occurring earlier and at higher rates. And I think we just need to watch what happens over coming weeks and months. Maybe this is something that's going to settle itself down, perhaps with school breaks and things. Perhaps it's going to carry on a bit longer. But, compared to previous years, the numbers are not entirely disproportionate. And I think that's really important to remember, especially that the symptoms of this are symptoms that are very, very common in mild childhood illnesses. Parents know their children best, and I would think they should draw on their own instincts in determining what to do.
I suppose the one thing about the COVID pandemic is it appears to have turned everyone into amateur epidemiologists, amateur doctors, and there is an awful lot of speculation, particularly on social media, that the restrictions, the lockdown, the lack of social mixing that we had, particularly children had during that period, has perhaps somehow contributed to all of this. What's your view?
So I think it's certainly contributed to why we're seeing so many viral infections going around in children at the moment. As everyone knows, every parent certainly recognises the winter is the time when children often have many coughs and colds. Children won't have had as many over previous years, not just because of lockdowns, but because of all the other social distancing, lower amounts of mixing compared to normal, increased amounts of hand washing, increased amounts of hand sanitisation. All of this has been going on for a while, and a lot of that has been relaxed as 2022 has gone on. So in some ways, it's no surprise there's a lot more viral infections. You put that in the mix with a every few years rise of group A strep. In some ways, it isn't so surprising that we are seeing a greater number of cases at the moment.
Very, very briefly, if we are trying to avoid strep A, what is the best advice?
So the best way to avoid strep A is by your standard means of hand washing in a normal way, hygiene around coughing and sneezing and blowing noses. But I would remind everyone that the vast majority of people who catch the strep A bacteria will not become unwell at all. And the vast majority of them will have caught it many, many times in the past without even knowing it.
Very reassuring. Dr. Cohen, thanks very much for being with us. But let's turn our attention back to that Arctic blast. My colleague, Sarah Jane Mee, managed to find herself stranded in the snow on the roadside last night. And Sarah Jane joins us now. With 9-year-old Ted, who was stuck with her in the snow, along with baby sister Ray. Hi, guys. I mean, first things first, SJ. I mean, I don't suspect you ever thought you'd be up on breakfast telly at this time in the morning. This must be a bit of a shock to the system. But tell us what happened.
I was so tired. When the producer texted us, we were still asleep, weren't we? Mind you, you were up. So what happened? We went, my sister lives about 20 minutes away. So we're in East Sussex and my sister lives in Kent. Sounds a long way, but it's only about 20 minutes away in the car, isn't it? So we popped over for a cup of tea about, I don't know, about 3 o'clock.
Yeah, probably.
Probably about 3 o'clock. And Uncle Marco is Canadian, isn't he? And he said it's snowing and he said you better move quick.
Because we were in a really small car.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, we were in a small car. So we set off and the snow was coming down really fast. And like I said, it's only 20 minutes, but we're having to eke along. So this picture here is actually, that's the hill where we got stuck, isn't it, Ted? Tell us what happened on the hill.
So we got stuck on the hill and everyone, so it was sort of really cool. Then as we were driving, everyone started to like stop and we started to like fall behind and skid into bushes. When we were skidding into the bushes,
we got stuck, didn't we?
We got really stuck. And then people with bigger cars thought they could make it, but they just drove in front of us and could just stop moving.
So it was so frustrating because we were on a hill and luckily it was a residential hill and everybody was coming out that lives on there because obviously they've seen this before and were towing people up the hill, but everybody kept trying to go in front of us, so we kept moving down the list. So we went from being really excited about the snow, didn't we, Ted, to how did we feel in that car?
Destroyed, just like nothing.
We got.
No. Yeah, I can understand. So how long were you guys actually stuck for?
Like a couple of hours.
A couple of hours. We were stuck for about 4. So what happened was this picture with the blue car. This is an abandoned car in front of us. So we abandoned that car, didn't we? Because who did we meet?
Because we met some snow angels.
Some snow angels. We call them snow angels. Cheryl and Jason, who, if they're listening this morning, I hope they got there. They were on their way to Rye on the A21. So basically, that's where it all stems from, the A21 that goes through Kent, East Sussex, down to sort of Hastings way. It was just completely gridlocked. The snow came down so quickly, cars were abandoned everywhere. Nobody could get back, could they? So Cheryl and Jason came to our car, saw that we had baby Ray in there, who she was pretty good, actually, wasn't she, considering she's normally a nightmare in the car. And they gave us a lift to the main road. And then who was our big snow angel at the end?
My dad.
Yeah, dressed like he was going skiing. And he managed to get us onto the A21. He was dressed appropriately. We weren't, where we said we had trainers on. Then we got to the A21 and we were there for another hour or so. And we literally just live off the A21. But it went as far as the eye could see. And I was following a lady on Twitter. I hope she's okay. I checked it this morning when I woke up. And at about 2 a.m, she said she'd only just turned off the A21. It was bad, wasn't it, Ted?
Yeah, it was terrible.
But how did you feel when we got home?
I felt really good because it was Ray's first experience in the snow. And when she was in the snow, she was running around and picking it up. Even though she did get a bit wet because of the snow.
Yeah, we'd been in the car a long time, so I let them stretch their legs and run about in the snow that they've been desperate to be in. We'd just been stuck in a car in it. And that's our garden this morning. I mean, that's unbelievable. It's 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, nothing. And then all of that's fallen overnight. Well,
I'm sensing a snowball fight coming just a little bit later on.
So this is me officially calling it a snow day, Neil.
Not a chance. SJ, look, I know you will have you'll kept the wee ones' spirits up. But, you know, Ray's a wee one, a very, very wee one. You must have been a little bit worried.
Yeah, well, we were a little bit. Do you want to go and get Ray, Ted, actually?
Yeah,
go and get Ray. Bring her in and she can sort of say hello. Obviously, you have to keep calm in the car. So it was a bit panicky because, like I said, my sister only lives 20 minutes down the road. And even though we knew snow was coming, it was forecast for later that night. And we just got caught out. I feel really stupid. Not enough snacks in the car for the kids. Luckily, they had warm coats on, but it was a real big lesson. I've always lived in a city. This is my first winter out of town, and we just got caught out, even though we thought it was... Do you want to come say hello to Uncle Neil? Hello. What was it like being in the car?
Hiya.
Did you go in the snow?
Yeah.
Did you run around in the snow?
In the snow.
You went in the snow?
You went in the snow? Were you all wrapped up?
We're in the snow. Can you say hello, Uncle Neil?
I can.
Everybody watching? Yes, we were nervous on that hill, weren't we? But, you know, luckily for Cheryl and Jason and Daddy coming to get us, we were okay. But I know a lot of people on the A21 weren't as lucky.
Look, I suspect you've got your hands full a little bit this morning, and yeah, someone probably wants to get out. Probably wants to get out and enjoy the snow for a little bit. So we'll let you go. Ray, I just want you to give me a wave before you go, Ray. And Ted, you look after yourself. Big wave. Take care, guys, and have a lovely Christmas when it comes.
Okay, see you, Neil. Thank you.
Time to take a very quick break, and of course afterwards we will update you as to the conditions on the roads, on the public transport network, and indeed at the very latest from Solihull. That's next. Welcome back. South Korea's Prime Minister has told Sky News that North Korea is approaching the final stages for another nuclear test. Han Duck-soo spoke to our Asia correspondent Helen Ann Smith.
It'll be somewhat hard to know exactly when they will actually do the things that all the international community would like to see them not to do. But we gather that they are ready to do something, and you know, our allies and partners are totally on alert for that kind of situations. But although we do not know exactly when, but we gather that they are prepared for that kind of, the testing.
Well, let's speak to Helen Ann Smith, who joins us now from Beijing. Helen Ann, let's be really specific here. What is the warning from the South Koreans? Exactly what is it that the North Koreans are just about to be able to do?
Well, the South Korean Prime Minister was very, very clear in that interview that they are pretty convinced that North Korea is preparing to undertake another full test of a nuclear weapon. Now, that would be very significant indeed, because North Korea haven't done something like that since 2017. And it comes at a time of massively increased tensions on the Korean Peninsula. There have been more missile launches from North Korea this year than at any other year since Kim Jong-un, the current leader of North Korea, came to power. And the Prime Minister there was very clear in that interview with me that they believe that those tests are being prepared for and that one will come. He said he couldn't say exactly when, but the implication was very much that they think that will be soon. And of course, that will be deeply escalatory, not least because the South Koreans have previously insinuated that if that happened, it'd be very difficult for them not to respond in some way. The other thing that has changed this year, as opposed to back in 2017 when the last nuclear test happened, is that the current South Korean administration is quite new. President Yoon just got elected earlier this year, and he ran on a platform where he promised to be much more hawkish when it came to the North Korean issue. His predecessor pushed for talks, pushed for diplomacy, although it was obviously always a little stilted and didn't get that far. But this president is making a point of being harder. So what that then leads to, how it escalates, is a slightly more open question and a slightly more open concern, frankly. The other thing that he indicated as well, he spoke about Kim Jong-un's daughter, who's been seen in public for the first time in the last couple of nuclear tests. Whether that's potentially a hint to some sort of succession, he said he couldn't say, but he thinks that it's very significant and a real message that that daughter was brought out as she has been. So really interesting lines at a very tense time on the Korean Peninsula.
Incredibly tense. Helen Ann, many thanks indeed. Some other news now, and at least 2 people have been killed in violence during the latest protests in Peru calling for early elections. The former president, Pedro Castillo, was removed from office and arrested after an impeachment trial. His successor has conceded to demonstrators' demands, Dina Boluarte, I should say, announcing she'll ask Congress to move elections forward. 3 people, including a friend of the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, have been killed after a man opened fire at a meeting of apartment block residents in Rome. Ms Meloni paid tribute to the victim, Nicoletta Golisano, posting a picture on Instagram. A 57-year-old man has been arrested. Serbia's president says he'll do everything to preserve peace in Kosovo, but has warned his country's army is ready to defend if needed. In recent weeks, Serbs in northern Kosovo, which they believe to be part of Serbia, have responded with violent resistance to moves by Kosovo that they see as anti-Serb. Well, let's return to that incident in Solihull near Birmingham, where 4 children fell through the ice into a lake, leaving them fighting for their lives. Others may also be missing after falling in. Well, joining us now is Katie Cornhill, Head of Training, Learning and Development at East Sussex Fire and Rescue Service. Katie, it's good to have you on this morning, but I suspect, like me, when you first heard about this story, a chill ran down your spine. It's absolutely horrible, isn't it?
Yes, good morning. Yes, thank you. Yes, it is. It is a very awful situation, also awful event, emergency that we've attended and circumstances. And certainly our thoughts in East Sussex Fire and Rescue are with the people involved and particularly the families and the emergency responders that had to attend such an incident.
Yeah, our correspondent Becky, who was on the scene, said that she had never seen so many first responders at an incident. So, you know, our hearts go out to them. Our thoughts are with them as well. It is a difficult job to do. But on an occasion such as this, just walk us through what the process would be. Because, of course, you know, the first responders would be putting themselves at risk going anywhere near that water as well.
So we would approach an incident like this in a quick time as possible, but very safely at the same time. We'd be trying to secure casualties that we can secure immediately where they need rescuing, not putting ourselves in danger and making sure that no one else is putting themselves in danger. When we attend incidents like this, often there is the initial casualty who may have gone through some ice, but there is often subsequent casualties that will go through the ice because they're trying to rescue them. And we do come across incidents like this one where there's groups of people playing on ice or on ice when they probably should not be.
Indeed. Well, I mean, leaving aside the obvious advice, which is just do not go on to ice on lakes. If someone is in a position where they see something like this happen, what is the advice? What can they do? Is it just simply a matter of call 999 and try and keep yourself safe?
So very first thing to do is exactly what you've said. Shout for help, phone 999. The two most important things to do. If the casualty isn't too far away, you shouldn't attempt to rescue them anyway, and certainly wait for the emergency services, but calm them and reassure them whilst you're at the scene with them. Shout to the casualty all the time, keep talking to them, encourage them to keep still, offer reassurance, and just try to calm them down as much as you can. You can attempt to reach them, obviously not by walking on the ice or trying to get on the ice, but you could use anything that you can find that's around. You could tie clothes together. You could use a tree branch if there's rope or anything like that available, or a flotation device. You can try and reach them from the bank. Best advice is lay down on the side of the bank to avoid being pulled in as well, and that of course spreads your weight on the bank. If you can't reach them, just as I say, find something to throw to them. Even a football will help to keep them afloat if they've gone through the ice.
Didn't even think of something as simple as that. And briefly, Katie, if you can, when someone goes through the ice and is immediately submerged in freezing cold water, what are the consequences, the health consequences?
Well, the immediate consequences are obviously very serious. The cold shock that you get, it will affect your body immediately, and you'll start to breathe much more rapidly because of the shock of the water. And the longer you stay in that water and that cold condition, the more effect there is immediately on your cardiovascular system.
Katie, I'm so sorry, but we've literally got 10 seconds left in the programme. We'll clip this interview up and put it on our social media channels. Everyone can take your advice. But Katie Cornhill, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, thank you.